Welcome to another weekly series of the AI Times Journal podcast, The Impact of AI in Our Day-to-Day Lives. Today, we are fortunate to have Mike O'Brien. He's currently the Chief Procurement Officer for App Orchid. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks. It's nice that you invited me. I think to reiterate, I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at App Orchid and also the head of Contract AI, our contract artificial intelligence product here at App Orchid.
So, Michael, App Orchid is a platform that helps enterprises build AI-fueled applications. Specifically from what you and I have spoken earlier, this platform uses deep learning, natural language processing, combined with that industry-specific content that really brings forward those, variety of predictive applications.
Yeah, Contract AI is just one application that we've built on the platform. And what's interesting about that is because we've built kind of a procurement application on an AI platform, we didn't just go out and license some functionality. Actually, we can exploit all different types of AI because we have a massive platform behind us. So we can use things like computer vision and NLP, but we can also blend that with linguistics and grammar, and we're doing things like with some external companies about using computer vision to identify people using their CCT cameras, identify the difference between steam and smoke. All on the same platform that we built this procurement technology.
So Michael, you've been a Chief Procurement Officer for most of your career, and now you are working on a different side of that industry. Can you give me a little bit more history about kind of the journey that you've had over the last 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think I have a kind of an interesting journey. I can start from the very beginning. I went to school for aerospace engineering and then ended up working for an investment bank running infrastructure. And then, one of the largest, I got really into the outsource advisory segment. And so I worked at ABN AMRO Bank, and we did those large, multi-billion-dollar outsourcings. And then I did, for a while, some consulting and outsourcing advisory. And then I started, kind of taking on the chief procurement role in a number of companies like Aviva, and then took over all of IT procurement for BP. And that's where it kind of got interesting was when I was working and took over procurement at BP, it was interesting to me that we had a number of areas where it was taking us like 3 to 6 months to get a deal completed. And kind of coming from more of a technical background, I was always interested in AI and the buzzwords. And okay, everybody talks about it, but I haven't really seen it. So like I have to get my hands dirty with it. Like I have to dig into it and see, what exactly is that? And could I use it for any benefit for us at BP and in procurement? And I go back to that, it was taking 3 to 6 months to do a contract. And I go back to kind of my old outsourcing advisory days. We could do almost a full, BPO, ITO type deal in 3 to 6 months, $1 billion deal, 2,000-page contract, thousands of people, staff transfer. And we could do that in 3 to 6 months. Why was it taking us so long to negotiate what I would say, even with a SaaS deal, 3 to 6 months? So that's where we kind of started thinking about, where could we use AI? So first I needed to understand the problem a little bit more. And so I kind of started digging into it. And what I found was, our team was spending, I would say, 80% of our time negotiating terms and conditions. The limitations of liability, all the legal terms. And we were spending about 20% working on the statements of work, deliverables, milestones, et cetera. And what I noticed was, as a chief procurement officer, almost 100% of the risks that came to my businesses arose from statements of work, delivery, milestones, acceptance criteria, warranty, those types of things. Almost nothing came from the legal terms. Now, legal terms are important, but are we spending so much time on a risk that doesn't show up very often and missing, our focus on the risk that shows up every day. And so one of the things we thought about was actually, hey, could we use AI to allow a supplier to negotiate their own terms and conditions? That should be something we could do. And when we can control that, that would be really interesting. If I could free my team up 80% of their time to focus on where they're focusing 20% of their time now, to actually help the stakeholders build relationships, help them articulate their requirements, and actually further develop the commercial constructs to make sure they're getting what they thought that they paid for. That would have a lot of value, and that actually would mitigate a lot of risk. So that's kind of where we started out in a use case. And so what we did there was we co-developed with App Orchid. I didn't have an R, in procurement. We don't have research and development budgets to go out and do these types of things. So, we thought, well, okay, how about, commercially, how about I bring the domain knowledge, and a colleague of mine, Jason Donner, he and I, we brought the domain knowledge to the product, and we'll let App Orchid bring the AI and the technical, and let's see if we can't merge that and actually create something. And what we were able to create was just that. But it was a really interesting journey, because the first thing we struggled with was, yes, we both thought, yeah, we could be able to create this tool where a supplier could actually negotiate their own contract. But first was, well, what would we allow a tool to actually negotiate with our customers? And what does good look like, and what does good look like for BP? And that was something that we kind of struggled with at first. Is like, I don't know. I mean, so we had our template, we had our fallback language. I really didn't know actually how well did those perform, and how often did we actually get what we went out with, and there was really no way to understand that. And so what we had to do was actually we started then developing an analytics application, to first pull in all of our contracts to actually figure out what good looks like for BP, right? What's actually acceptable. That it's, what we found was, in some areas we got our template language, and then in other areas we didn't. We agreed something far outside what our template and our fallback positions were. And so understanding that at scale was really important to us. To one, we were able to find some areas where we were negotiating things probably incorrectly, and it became a training opportunity. Others is, we actually could figure out what was the market for BP, what was really acceptable to us. So that analytics app is really key to what we were trying to set up. And that's really the heart of the artificial intelligence that we've built at App Orchid, and for this use case. So what we did then was actually use all that information that we had created, that we had ingested, to inform what we want to do in the future. So we use all that good work from the past, right, and to inform the future. I might want to step back just a few steps and just say, I think over time in procurement, we've been lulled into this idea that every interaction between a customer and supplier needs this piece of art created, this contract created with these specific terms and conditions that are bespoke and custom for every interaction. And I truly don't believe that. I think it's, if you look at the data, all that stuff kind of converges over time. And that was something we were able to see. So one of the things that we're trying to push is that actually there's more standardization that should happen out there. And while we look at, we started looking at things from a customer perspective, you also have to look at it from a supplier's perspective as well. There's a lot of money involved in pursuits for deals with their customers. Mm-hmm. So that there's an opportunity on both sides actually to do this in a much better way. So the one thing that, my product is really created out of 3 applications. There's the analytics app that I've spent a lot of time kind of talking about, and that's where the bulk of the AI is. So in our buyer app, we created a way to create new deals. And so, what we also have done is created what we call like a no-code authoring app. And within that, you can understand the workflow, or you can create your own custom workflow and questions, and manage your templates and manage your clauses. And so you're managing things at a clause level and a template level. And so there's not the need to have, like in the US, there's no need to have 50 different templates for each state. You can have one template and then rules as to what things you would bring in to each contract versus location, versus category, versus specific rules, security policies. You can see all that logic in a way that you consume it. And what I've seen out in the market is it's very difficult to create something like that without hiring a third-party integrator to actually create that massive conditional flow for you. And this kind of makes it easier, but it's kind of one of those like no-code application that does that for you. So what do we do with those templates? And I think that's where we kind of go back to the AI. What we do is we create these dynamic templates. So they're your template, but they're also, they're built in with all the variances that you've kind of curated and agreed over time. And that's where that gets kind of interesting, because your clause is not your clause. Your clause actually has optionality with it. And so the tool will go through and understand what type of clauses have you materially negotiated over time. And then it will give you the variances that you've signed up for. But it'll also tell you where you haven't materially negotiated and then shouldn't be negotiating. So that's one thing that really helps, the speed and efficiency of what we're doing is you can now see the performance of your templates. You can see the performance of your clauses. You can see where you're spending a lot of time negotiating, and you can see whether you're spending a lot of time negotiating on things that you're not interested in. I've seen where customers have 100% of the time had clauses deleted, and 100% of the time they accepted it. So, why are you bothering with that? It's in most cases they're a massive overreach that nobody would sign up for, and everybody knows it, but it's wasting customer time, wasting supplier time. And then you kind of look at the psychology of that as well. But this is kind of where we're using, artificial intelligence to bring that insight and make that useful, right? We're tying that and being able to read those contracts and understand commercial and legal language.
Want your brand message heard? Become a podcast sponsor. Visit AITimeJournal.com to view our packages.
I have a background with contracts. I've worked with a lot of those cloud procurement tools that are out there. What specifically, within what you're doing with those cognitive technologies, what specifically how are you applying that to what you're doing today, and how's that advantageous to the consumer?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? Most natural language processing algorithms are open source and they're available to be used, but it's the different layers that you put on that and the different machine learning techniques and approaches that you use to those things as kind of building blocks that make it interesting. So our big differentiation is we're able to understand commercial and legal language, whereas a natural language processing engine actually can't. It's kind of it's trained on like Wikipedia. It's trained on conversation, and it doesn't semantically understand the real difference of an inclusion of an and or an or in a sentence. It doesn't actually change that meaning. Whereas when our different methods, we understand that that's a significantly different change to the meaning of the language. And so we try to better understand that. I can kind of give an understanding. I can give an example. So here's an example of that I use a lot, is kind of showing like people, I'll pull up the kind of the open source models and I'll show them reading in, addresses, right? And the open source models can't read addresses very well. They confuse street numbers with dates or times. They confuse names with proper names or people. I think the most common thing is really the numbering that gets construed. Zip codes get construed into dates or vice versa. And that's where we see, what I call is, I think most things that I see out there in the market, AI stands for another individual actually doing the work and needing to actually QA the things. And that's why you see, like, when you ask for a simple question from these folks claiming to be AI, they say, oh, that'll take a month. Well, actually, it shouldn't take a month. It should be almost instantaneous when you want to know something. And that's where I think we see a lot of, differentiation, but also a lot of like, my waffle maker, my toaster has AI as far as I know, right? And it's probably on the new marketing boxes. It's plugged into the Internet of Things, and it's AI. But that's the reality. And I think in a number of cases we've been called in, when folks have actually, some of our customers, where they've tried with some of these other folks when they said they were AI and had a really slick demo that was pretty baked. And, when push came to shove, they actually couldn't deliver because it wasn't really AI. It was a manual operation in the background. And that's I think the big thing to understand is, when you're dealing with an AI company and they say that they're doing, something for you using AI, they should be really passionate about it. They should want to tell you all about it and how they're doing it. But when they can't say they're using AI, but they can't really tell you, it's probably not AI. And that's been my experience. And that's really why I kind of sought out when I was at BP is like, let's go work with an AI company. Let's really dig into some of this.
I heard you speak recently, and you used the term fake AI, I believe.
I may have used that, fake AI.
Is that what you're referencing here?
Yeah. I mean, I think AI washing, fake AI. I mean, I think that's, I don't know if that's the correct word. It's the word it's the term I'll use.
Yeah.
I'm sure people will correct me, but I mean, it's where it's not real. And, I know I get frustrated when, people just aren't honest with me. So when somebody says, when you're buying a product and they say, oh, artificial intelligence and all this that's going on with it, you expect that, you expect certain things. I find that people either are really cynical about it and think that it can't do anything, or they think it's like the Matrix or Terminator 2 level. And the reality of it is probably more towards the earlier stages of things. But I would say most of the things that you run into today aren't really AI that are called AI. I mean, in my definition, I think we've talked about this before, AI needs to be able to learn. And that's what I think is really interesting. How, I think it's a great augment to procurement individuals. It's not going to replace procurement individuals, but it's a great aid and tool to us to take away kind of the mundane things. I mean, I don't know. I've been, I think you said you've been in procurement for 27 years. I mean, I think I've probably been in procurement itself for 20 plus years. I don't know how many limitations of liability I've negotiated or insurance, but I know that, I don't consider myself a great negotiator because I negotiated limitations of liability. That's not what gets me up in the morning. But what we were able to see, as a result of that is AI could be used in that way. And at BP, we reduced our time to contract from 3 to 6 months down to as little as 24 hours and as long as 8 days. And, folks can reach out to BP and ask them. I mean, it's their numbers.
Yeah.
But that's just impressive. I mean, like, that's like, we used a tool, we used artificial intelligence and it worked. I mean, that's hard. That's hard to, come across. And that's why it was really interesting to me. Part of the reason why I've kind of jumped the fence, right? I'm on the supplier side now developing these products is because, I think I've worked in the industry long enough to know where the gaps and where the pain points are, and actually where can we use technology to influence and make our procurement lives a little bit more easier.
Right. I absolutely agree with your assessment that there's really two buckets to AI, because AI is a very broad term that we hear very loosely lately. There's the true artificial intelligence, meaning I've programmed it, but as new information comes in, the system is learning on its own without any additional intervention. And then there's the cognitive technologies, which is where I'm seeing, your discussion here today. And you mentioned earlier, just a moment ago, about how these technologies should be augmenting the human behavior. So what I'm interested in is and I'm getting really excited about this, is when you look at what you're doing with that contract application, and you're noticing that you're able to reduce these cycle times, what's left? What in this process now is left for the human intervention?
There's two things maybe I want to talk about. Is when I was doing outsourcing advisory, we worked so closely with the stakeholders. We were all part of the same team. What I find about procurement is, like, some procurement organizations, stakeholders don't want to. It's like going to the Department of Motor Vehicles, because we hide behind our process. We have these stringent processes that must be followed, and we don't take the time actually to learn the stakeholders' business. I think for procurement, this is the perfect advantage for us to actually spend that time to actually start being, a contributor to the value of the business, to know the business, not to make sure that everybody's followed the process, but actually where the tool can take care of the process stuff. But actually what it can't do is actually build that relationship with your stakeholder and help that stakeholder actually articulate their requirements in a way that makes sense, or in a way that is commercially viable, right? Or, sometimes stakeholders want things that aren't possible, right? And then, to be able to spend that time, that's where we start creating value again. And that's where I think that when I say we use, AI to augment, that's where, it lets us get back into that area where we're actually part of the business and actually a value generator for the business. I think for far too long, we've been trying to tell everybody how much money we saved, and look at me, I saved you X million of dollars. And then, on the business side, whatever you saved them, they just spent somewhere else. And so, as you go up the chain, nobody ever saw anything but the bottom line. So, those procurement value savings aren't necessarily always there for everybody. But actually, when you start to be part of that business and part of actually steering, and being more strategic with them, it's so much more enjoyable. And you can add tremendously more value, because, you're able to get through a lot of those pitfalls that you don't have the time to, because that 20% of the time that you're working with your stakeholders on statements of work and things like that, most of the time you're chasing them to write it. And what happens is the supplier ends up writing it instead of you working with the stakeholder to articulate it. And that causes its own problems. So AI, I think, frees us up to actually do the work that we've always all wanted to do, I think, as procurement professionals. I mean, I don't come home and, tell my family, hey kids, Dad, I really did really well with that limitations of liability. You're going to be so proud of your father. He really did that. I mean, that's not, that has never happened.
Nor hopefully it shouldn't ever. Yeah.
Right. But, but I can talk about, this big deal that I did that we might see a commercial about on TV. Yeah, I did. I was part of that. And we can talk about that. And that's where I think, AI, it can be scary. It can be this. It's not going to take everybody's jobs, but I think it is going to change. It's going to augment what we do, because, what we've proven that we can get rid of some of that mundaneness, that stuff that is just process, and actually engage. You'd be surprised at how much actually engaging with folks and folks being able to talk to a human person and not be hidden behind a process will actually create such a better work environment for you, and increase, the opinions of your stakeholders. It'll increase the opinion of the work that you're actually doing. Really helpful. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm getting more into the socio impact of AI, but I think that's really interesting, is how can we use it as an aid to what we're doing. But one key thing that when we were developing it, I never really thought about, and it was probably a pretty myopic view, was I didn't think about how the suppliers would react to it. I did a little bit as to whether they would play ball, but we had the leverage at BP. But what I found from many of the suppliers were they reached out to me to tell me how great that process was. Because by understanding and allowing for BP to understand what's actually acceptable to them, and then choose, which of those options they wanted to avail to their suppliers. Suppliers, it changed the process so much that the suppliers can say, you know what, you've actually, you just cut to the chase and told me what was acceptable. And so I'm gonna, if you're telling me I can be to contract with BP tomorrow if I select this option, well, I'm going to select that option. And that's how we got to that, doing a contract within 24 hours or as long as 8 days, is because we're just, here's what's acceptable to us. And then we kind of grade it, like we grade homework, and we let suppliers know that they're being graded. And, my thing is I don't do business with C, D, or E players. So, if you keep your score above 80, then you're going to be okay. But that's kind of how we used, our methodology around that is, let's just cut to the chase. We'll offer the win-win clauses, and, we're not going to spend, 6 months trying to get to those answers. We'll just give you the answers, and then you choose which ones you want, and we'll get to contract. A very different approach, and not all, and not all people are ready for that. Let's just say, but. And that's why we kind of offer a number of different ways we can do it more traditionally. But we use AI basically to understand what you've done in the past. And we're using AI to understand, like supplier paper. It's great to understand your own paper, but, understanding supplier paper. I think, Melissa, you asked, how do we do that? And we create what we call knowledge graphs, or, we build these semantic objects that we can understand, the relationship between that. We can understand intellectual property clause that isn't section 12, that isn't highlighted. We can understand intellectual property like constructs that can be embedded in a statement of work and pull those out. So in some cases we're doing audit of statements of work, and we can check to see, is there any co-employment risks? Are there people's names in some of these things? And, is somebody changed the ownership of deliverables in a statement of work that is in contrast to what's in an MSA? Those are the things that, at BP, if we did them manually, would we be able to catch those things? Probably not. One example is I found supplier failure and force majeure clauses. And when I'm reviewing something, I'm looking at the statement of work. I'm not really looking at the T's and C's, to be honest. In my background, I want to make sure, basically selfishly, I was always looking at the things that cause me disputes, right? If it's a big deal, like what are we buying? How are we buying it? What are we buying? I'm not necessarily looking at some of the other constructs, because you just don't have the time. If you're managing $2 billion you spend a year and thousands of suppliers, you don't have the time to do that. But an AI tool, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't go on vacation.
Yeah.
It can help me out in that way.
Something just popped up. I was on a project a long time ago, and I walked into a conference room, and there was 4 people sitting in a computer with a bunch of contracts, sitting next to them. And I questioned, what is it that you guys are doing? Because it looks really boring. And they said, oh, well, our job for the next 3 weeks is to go through every single one of these contracts and compare it with another document and see if the supplier's been out of compliance. And if the supplier's been out of compliance, then we need to document it, understand how long they've been out of compliance, and then the company needs to make a decision of whether or not the impact is worth to go back after that, from the supplier. And I was like, wow, that looks like a lot of, and it was a lot of manual effort and a lot of analytics. And ultimately what I discovered 4 or 5 weeks later was that looking at it from the customer side, they actually found that because nobody was reviewing their contracts in a way that I think that you've just highlighted, the company actually lost over $2 million in just things that they spent a lot of time negotiating for, but no one went back to actually double check that, that both parties were in compliance of that. In that scenario, what I'm hearing from you is this technology that you guys and this platform that you've developed, this would be another use case for that. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I think, and that's what's interesting, instead of like I would say a legacy CLM product, we're kind of like a new product built on an AI platform. So we're not limited as to the use cases that we can satisfy. It's not developed for one use case. We can quickly pivot, to something else. And that's really what's interesting to me is anybody can kind of come up with, with a use case. Like in most of my former colleagues, I'm like, hey, if you want to know if AI can do it, just bring me your use case and I'll tell you whether it can or can't. And if it can't, I'll give you a call back up when it can, right?
Right.
It's changing. Like even, I signed up with them in December. I've been with App Orchid now since December. Even since December, we've got new functionality and new things and new tricks up our sleeves, which is really, really cool, which opens up new use cases. So
are you still focused on, because I know we've been really focused on the contract application, but you sound like you've drank the Kool-Aid for AI. Is there other areas that you're, because of your background from a chief procurement officer, is there other areas that you're already seeing, the next round of applications that you guys want to start looking at?
I mean, absolutely. I think we're constantly doing that. I mean, our contract authoring was one that we started with, and we developed in a couple months. One of the things is, audit and compliance. Every year, working in procurement, auditor compliance comes to you and they want to audit 10 of your biggest contracts every year. And so we go through this whole thing where, okay, let's get the MSAs, let's get all the invoices, let's get all the statements of work and purchase orders and all that stuff. And we go and we audit and we spend 3 to 6 months doing that on maybe 5 to 10 suppliers. But I have 2,000 suppliers and we're going to audit like 10 of them. This allows you, like, one of the things that we're talking about is actually, how about you, what if you could audit all your suppliers all the time in real time? I mean, that's another great use case, right? For this type of technology. It's really just understanding, language and constructs and, compliance and law, this all comes together. And it can grow outside of procurement, procurement adjacent things, just even legal. We talk about procurement, but, legal, half of my customers are legal. So there's a massive opportunity there. Where we've deployed a lot of legal ops and large companies, right, to external legal to do legal operations for us. A lot of that can be done with AI now, where before we could have done it with a low cost location. The other thing I think which is interesting is AI, in a lot of situations is a really slick way to actually insource your outsourced or offshore work. So it's something you can bring back in. So a lot of the stuff that we felt was, not critical, not core to a business, not complex. Typically in the last 20 years, we've said, we can push that to offshore or near shore or whatever shore. But AI and technology and automation, that we would just go out kind of outside of AI, allows actually, to actually insource some of that back in house, which I think is really interesting. There's always the tide of insourcing and outsourcing that's been going on for years.
Yeah, you actually just answered my question, because I was gonna ask you. It's more than just the AI technologies is more than just augmenting. there's got to be some additional value. And I think you've just given the exact example that I was looking for, is where's that additional value that AI can be looked at within the procurement or supply chain organization. And your note here was, one option is you don't need to outsource anymore. You can pull that in, because now you've got the technology to do the extra workload at a lower cost without having to hire additional people.
Yeah. And one of the things was, how do I get what's in my head that I've been doing for 20 some years into a tool so that everybody can use that?
Right.
Now, we might laugh, and maybe nobody wants that.
Yeah.
But it is, how do you make yourself scale? How can you replicate some of that? And we can do that pretty successfully, at a kind of a low level, right? We can't do emotions. I know my family says I don't have emotions, but like AI is not good for that yet. I mean, maybe someday. And I think that changes.
I didn't think about it until just now. But as an industry, we've seen that a long time ago, when my dad worked, he worked 30 years at a job and left. And now, my generation, I'm in this Generation X. You've got people that are still within, maybe, they're constantly in 3 or 4 different careers, 5 or 6 different, companies. But then you're looking at these next generations, and the expectations from the Pew Research Center is that they're going to even be more diversified. So I think you've brought up a really good point, is you've got all this knowledge and expertise. And if the new workforce dynamic is not going to have people being at the same company for long periods of time and taking the time to absorb the knowledge and then, apply it, then these AI technologies, I think we've just got another really good value. These AI technologies can take that information, and it doesn't matter if you've got, high turnover, because you've got that knowledge set that's embedded in that technology.
No, absolutely. I think core to where we started from was what we call tribal knowledge, and being able to collect that and use that and gather inferences from that tribal knowledge. And that's kind of where one of the key things that we use is a knowledge graph to build that. And so that we are able to capture that, like knowledge, the ability for knowledge to walk out the door. Now we can mitigate that risk, in part. And that becomes interesting as well as make that knowledge available. It's kind of like, when we were in school, we went to this thing called a library, and we used encyclopedias and card files to find the stuff up. I mean, it's the accessibility of knowledge, right? And so some of the things that we're doing is actually making the accessibility of my knowledge accessible to other people in the company.
I'm laughing because I just this past weekend explained to my daughter what an encyclopedia was, because she couldn't understand it. I had to physically just go get a book and say, look, instead of you asking, Siri or searching it on Google, you would have to go find a book, search A to Z, find out the item. And half the time, the guy who put the encyclopedia together may not actually have the information in there. So I laugh because I just had this conversation with my daughter who's 11.
Yeah. I've had that with my daughter who's 12. Yeah. I'm like, you have it so easy. We would have to they would want you to do, like when we were kids, they would want you to do so much research, right? For papers that you were writing. But, we all just basically went to the encyclopedia, but then, we had to show that we also looked at some other books. But were you going to read all these books to find that nugget of information that you were going to put in your paper? It was really difficult. I was like, now it's all done for you. Everything's accessible. So
now you're taking it to the next level, Yeah,
it's things that aren't written. How do you actually, how do you collect that? How do you gather that tribal knowledge?
You mentioned earlier the conversations that you've been having, as now that you're on the supply side, the conversations that you're having with your customers, and you started to get into something that I wanted to know more about, is what exactly what advice can you leave behind for the folks listening today? What are the questions that people should be asking? Because keep in mind, if I'm in procurement, I'm not only using the tools, I'm probably out there trying to assess the tools. I'm trying to understand what your tool does compared to the other tool. I'm learning a whole new language and a whole new industry. What are like some of the key questions that you can recommend that these procurement supply chain professionals should be asking?
Well, I think first, anybody that says that they have a tool or something with AI, one, those folks should be super passionate about AI. And that should be all that they really want to tell you about, because what they have should be really, really fantastic and, new. They should also really be wanting to not share anything with you unless they have an NDA, because everybody's technique is different, right?
Oh, okay.
There's things here I can't tell you that we think is, part of our patent pending technology that I'm not willing to, tell random people about,
Mm-hmm.
the way, the techniques and things like that we use. So, a key thing is, are they quick to get you to sign an NDA because they want to tell you all about, their product? And I'll tell you that all these folks that say they have AI, they want to show me a demo of it or a slideshow, but they don't want to tell me how they do it. Even, so one of the things is, folks that are really doing AI really want to tell you how they're doing it, because they want to show off a little bit. Like, look at my baby, isn't it beautiful? When folks don't want to tell you about it, it's because they don't really have a baby and it's not so beautiful. So I think that's one thing. I think you also look at, pricing constructs. Are folks pricing this as like a BPO or a manual labor? Like, you've got folks in the back room reading the contracts and tagging it for you. I think that's a key thing. I think a lot of folks say that AI is this manual tagging and making your documents searchable. That technology has been out for a long time. So you have to kind of understand, that is, how long does it take, right, for you to start seeing some results? Basically, you should be able to start seeing some results like fairly quickly, right? Because these models should be trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
This whole, everybody's kind of lulled into this, you need millions of documents and, everything needs to be trained to start getting any output from that. But that's not necessarily true, right? There's already trained models out there that you should be using. It might not be trained on your specific area, and there will need to be some training and some supervised learning, but some of the stuff should be more readily apparent, and that's how you can kind of start to feel out whether it's real AI or fake AI. And I think, the big thing for me is people. I haven't found a whole. When I was searching, about AI and what we could do with it, I found a lot of people that said they did AI, but I couldn't find a whole lot that actually could tell me what they were actually doing. And that was, and that, I think that more than anything else, is something, is a good delineation of whether you want to go forward. But the other thing is, do you need AI? Just because someone tells you shouldn't pay a premium for AI if it's not really AI. And I think, do you really need AI to solve this? I mean, if you're looking at it in a relational database, should be able to do this. And actually, in all reality, a lot of the stuff is a relational database in the background doing it. Should you be paying extra for AI? So I think you just need to be careful about, are you paying for a buzzword that can mean so many different things? So I think, I would say be wary and be careful that you're actually getting what you think you're getting. But I think if you follow that, those, I think that's kind of the litmus test.
I do want to ask one last thing. You mentioned that you recently shifted into, this area of AI, and that you did a lot of research. Do you have any recommendations for some of us who may be more interested in learning more about the AI and the cognitive technologies? Did you find some sources out there that you thought, wow, this really resonated with me, I really understand it, that you could recommend?
I mean, sources,
No?
I actually found, that's hard to say. Like, I'm kind of more of I'm not a book read individual.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a more of a hands-on. So I guess the one thing I would recommend is to go find those startups out there that are doing this and just focusing on that and see if they're hungry for use cases. I mean, I think there's a new market that's out there that you don't have to go spend tens of millions of dollars with the usual suspects to develop something. You can do something like I did. Let's go co-develop something. And I think that's where that's where I learned the most. I mean, there's a lot of theory. There's a lot of theory in AI, right? And you can read stuff and it just goes, way over your head. But actually, it's the application of technology to your use cases is where it starts to make sense for me. Is I don't need to get to the level of an AI expert to be able to understand it.
Yeah, I think you just outlined a new trend. The usual suspects versus all these other smaller firms that maybe are a little bit more flexible in developing something specific to what you need.
And focused. I mean, there's something about, if a company's focused on AI, that's all they're focused on. If, versus another company that might be focused on AI and M&A and audit and, a massive, but those are the folks that are focused, they're passionate, and they're hungry for data. They're hungry for your use case. That's where I think you'll see the fastest uptake and your most return on your, I would say, not your money necessarily, but your time. And so you're able to learn it as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you spent an hour with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. No, it didn't even seem like an hour, Melissa. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. And I think what'll be really neat is to check back in and see what else you guys are creating that's going to help us impact our day-to-day lives and make our lives a little bit easier using AI.
Will do. I'll keep you posted.
All right.